Hey everyone, so this week I'm going to talk a little bit about citric acid cycle and how that leads into the electron transport chain and how that leads to the proton motive force. But I'm going to focus specifically on this 8 electrons shown here, because I don't think the book does the greatest job of saying exactly what these 8 electrons are and how they work. So what they are is actually these 3 NADHs and this FADH here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the NADH and the FADs, but essentially when you have an NAD, like shown here, when you go to NADH, this picks up, oops, should be down there, no charge. You're making a new bond. So you used to just have one bond to hydrogen here. Now you have 2 different bonds, and it takes 2 electrons to make a bond. So each of these NADs represent, and the FAD, 2 electrons. So that is where our 8 electrons that are being generated from the citric acid cycle come from. Now with each of these in hand, we're going to start to build up a charge differential. So what we want is a large amount of protons inside of the membrane and a large amount, or less protons outside of the membrane. To do that, we're going to use this electron transport chain. So you can either have NADH or FAD enter into it. These actually should be 2 electrons here, because it's going to take 2 electrons to give us O minus minus, which can then pick up 2 protons. Oh wait, no. Crap. Sorry, it's gonna break the bond. So do you need 4 electrons? Just kidding. I need to erase this part. We are gonna break one of these, and we're actually gonna take in another 2 electrons. This is not actually going to form, but it's going to eventually break down into 2 waters. And this all happens, I'm going to draw a little line here outside, so outer membrane, versus this, which is in your inner membrane. So when you do this step where your proton motive force, one of the other things that happens is you have an H plus that's going to enter in at each one of these steps. And I'm kind of messing up this graph. And that's interesting because you're also losing 4 H pluses when you go from oxygen to these 2 waters. From here, if we look at the whole diagram, so this is something that you can actually see diagramming the process. So you're gaining an H plus at each of these steps, and we're starting to build up a ton of this H plus in our inner membrane. And then also, this guy here is also removing 4 H pluses for every oxygen that's transferred. So what you're essentially doing is building up a ton of positives in here and removing a bunch of positives here. And that's what drives our ATP pump. The large amount of protons on the inside and almost zero amount on the outside. And this diagram does a good job of illustrating that, where you can see these protons are being pumped in by your electron transport chain, which is then driving your ATP pump in order to create more ATP. Okay, I hope that was helpful for you guys to kind of see how this happens. If you guys have any questions, please send me an email.